We especially focus on misinformation that can lead to imminent physical harm, like misleading health advice saying if you're having a stroke, no need to go to the hospital, just prick your finger and you'll be fine. That's dangerous. We need to address that. But more broadly, we've actually found that a different strategy works best. And that is focusing on the authenticity of the speaker rather than trying to judge the content itself. Much of the content that those Russian accounts shared was distasteful, but it would have been considered permissible political discourse if it had been shared by real American citizens. So the real issue is that it was posted by fake accounts that were coordinating together and pretending to be people that they were not. And we've seen similar issues with these groups that pump out misinformation like spam just to make money. So the solution here is to verify the identities of anyone who's getting a wide amount of distribution and to get a lot better at identifying and taking down fake accounts. So we now require you to provide a government ID and to prove your location if you want to run political ads or if you're going to run a large page. You can still say controversial things if you want, but you have to stand behind them with your real identity and face accountability. Our AI systems have also gotten a lot more advanced at detecting clusters of fake accounts that aren't behaving the way that people would. So we now remove billions of fake accounts a year, mostly within minutes of signing up and before they really have a chance to do very much. So focusing on authenticity and verifying accounts has been a much better solution than an ever-expanding definition of what is and is not harmful content. Now, another qualitative difference is that the internet lets people form communities that wouldn't have been possible before. And this is good in a lot of ways because it helps people find groups where they belong and share interests and can meet other people. But the flip side of this is that it has the potential to lead to polarization. And I care a lot about this because, after all, our goal is to bring people together. Now, much of the research that I've seen on this is actually mixed. And a lot shows that in some ways the internet can actually decrease aspects of polarization. The most polarized voters in the last presidential election were actually the people who were least likely to use the internet much at all. Research from the Reuters Institute also shows that people who get their news online have much more diverse media diets and are exposed to a much broader range of content than people who don't. And this is because most people just watch a couple of cable news stations or read a couple of newspapers. But even if most of your friends online have similar views, some don't, and you're going to get exposed to different perspectives through them. Still, we also have an important role in designing our systems to show diversity of ideas and to make sure that we're not encouraging polarizing content. Now, one last difference with the internet that I want to talk about is that it lets people share things that would have been impossible to capture and share before. So take live streaming, for example. This allows families to be together for moments like birthdays. We've even had a few weddings. It allows school teachers to read to children bedtime stories who might not otherwise be read to. And of course, it's allowed us to witness some really important cultural moments. But we've also seen people broadcast self-harm and suicide and some terrible acts of violence. And these are new challenges. And our responsibility is to build systems that can respond quickly. And we're particularly focused here on well-being, especially for young people. We built a team of thousands of people and AI systems that can now detect risks of self-harm within minutes, so we can reach out to people when they need that help most. In the last year, we've helped first responders reach people who needed help thousands of times. So for each of these issues, I believe that we have two responsibilities: to remove content when it can cause real danger as effectively as we can, and to fight to uphold as wide of a definition of freedom of expression as possible, and to not allow the definition of what is considered dangerous to expand beyond what is absolutely necessary. And that's what I'm committed to. So these are new properties of the internet. But there are also shifting cultural sensitivities and diverging views on what content people consider dangerous. So take misinformation. No one tells us that they want to see misinformation. Right? That's why we work with independent fact checkers to stop hoaxes that are going viral from spreading. But misinformation is a pretty broad category. A lot of people like satire, which isn't necessarily true. A lot of people talk about their experiences by telling stories that may be exaggerated or have inaccuracies, but speak to a deeper truth than our lived experience. And I think we need to be careful about restricting that. And even when there is a common set of facts, different media outlets often tell very different stories, emphasizing different angles and aspects of the story. So there's a lot of nuance here. And while I certainly worry about an erosion of truth, I don't think most people want to live in a world where you can only post things that tech companies judge to be 100% true. So we recently clarified our policies to ensure that people can see primary source speech from political figures that shapes our civic discourse. Political advertising is more transparent on Facebook than anywhere else. We keep all political and issue ads in an archive so everyone can scrutinize them for years to come, and that's something that no TV or print does. Now, we don't fact-check political ads, and we don't do this to help politicians, but because we think people should be able to see for themselves what politicians are saying. And for the same reason, if content is newsworthy, we also won't take it down even if it would otherwise conflict with some of our standards. Now, I know many people disagree with this, but in general, I don't think it's right for a private company to censor politicians or the news in a democracy. And we are not an outlier here. The other major internet platforms and the vast majority of media also run these same ads. American tradition also has some precedent here. The Supreme Court case I mentioned earlier that gave us our current broad speech rights was actually a case about an ad with misinformation in it. It was an ad supporting Martin Luther King Jr. and criticizing the Alabama Police Department. And the police commissioner sued the Times. The jury in Alabama found against the Times. And then the Supreme Court unanimously reversed that decision, creating today's speech standard. So as a principle, in a democracy, I believe that people should decide what is credible, not tech companies. Now, of course, there are exceptions. And even for politicians, we're not going to allow content that incites violence or risks imminent harm. And of course, we don't allow voter suppression. Voting is voice. Fighting voter suppression is as important for the civil rights movement as free expression has been. And just as we are inspired by the First Amendment, we're inspired by the 15th Amendment too. Now, given the sensitivity around political ads, I've considered whether we should stop allowing them altogether. From a business perspective, the controversy certainly is not worth the very small part of our business that they make up. But political ads can be an important part of voice, especially for local candidates and up-and-coming challengers and advocacy groups that the media might not otherwise cover, so that way they can get their voice into the debate. Banning political ads favors incumbents and whoever the media chooses to cover. But practically, even if we wanted to ban political ads, it's not even clear where you draw the line. There are many more ads about issues than there are directly about elections. Would we ban ads about healthcare or immigration or women's empowerment? And if you're not going to ban those, does it really make sense to give everyone else a voice in political debates except for the candidates themselves? So there are going to be issues any way you cut this. And I believe that when it's not absolutely clear what to do, that we should err on the side of greater expression. Or let's take hate speech, which we define as someone directly attacking a person or group based on a characteristic like race, gender, or religion. We take down content that could lead to real-world violence. And in countries at risk of conflict, or where there is a conflict, that includes anything that could lead to imminent violence or genocide. And we also know from history that dehumanizing people is often the first step towards inciting violence. So if you say, immigrants are vermin, or all Muslims are terrorists, that makes other people feel like they can escalate and attack that group without consequences. So we don't allow that. And I take this really seriously. And we work really hard to get this off of our platform. American free speech tradition recognizes that some speech can have the effect of restricting others' right to speak. And while American law doesn't recognize hate speech as a category, it does prohibit racial harassment and sexual harassment. We still have a very strong culture of free speech, even while our laws clearly prohibit discrimination. But still, people have broad disagreements over what qualifies as hate and should be allowed. Some people think that our policies don't prohibit content that they think qualifies as hate, while others think that some of what we take down should be a protected form of expression. This has been one of the hardest categories to get right. Now, I believe that people should be able to use our services to discuss issues that they feel strongly about, from religion and immigration to foreign policy and crime. And I think you should even be able to be critical of groups without dehumanizing them. But even this it's not always straightforward to judge or implement at scale, and it can often lead to some unfortunate enforcement mistakes on our part. Is someone reposting that video of a racist attack because they're condemning it? Or are they glorifying it and hoping that people copy it? Are they using normal offensive slang? Or are they now using an innocent word in a new way, hoping to incite violence or even genocide? Now, multiply those linguistic challenges by more than 100 languages around the world where we operate. Rules about what you can and can't say often have unintended consequences. When speech restrictions were implemented in the UK in the last century, Parliament noted that they were often applied more heavily to citizens from poorer backgrounds because the way they expressed things didn't match the elite Oxbridge style. And I believe that in everything we do, we need to make sure that we are empowering people and not simply reinforcing existing institutions and power structures. So that brings us back to the crossroads that we find ourselves at today. Are we going to continue fighting to give more people a voice to be heard? Or are we going to pull back from free expression? Now, I see three major threats ahead. The first is legal. And we're increasingly seeing laws and regulations around the world that undermine free expression and people's human rights. And these local laws are each individually troubling, especially when they shut down speech in places where there isn't democracy or freedom of the press. But it's even worse when countries try to impose their speech restrictions on the rest of the world. So this raises the larger question about the future of our global internet. China is building its own internet focused on very different values. And it's now exporting their vision of the internet to other countries. Now, until recently, the internet in almost every country outside of China has been defined by American platforms with strong free expression values. But there's no guarantee that these values will win out. A decade ago, almost all of the major internet platforms were American. Today, 6 of the top 10 are Chinese. And we're beginning to see this in social media too. While our services like WhatsApp are used by protesters and activists everywhere due to strong encryption and privacy protections, on TikTok, the Chinese app growing quickly around the world, mentions of these same protests are censored, even here in the US. Is that the internet that we want? So this is one of the reasons why we don't operate Facebook, Instagram, or our other services in China. I wanted our services in China because I believe in connecting the whole world, and I thought, maybe we could help create a more open society. And this is something that I worked hard on for a long time. But we could never come to agreement on what it would take for us to operate there, and they never let us in. And now, we have more freedom to speak out and stand up for the values that we believe in and fight for free expression around the world. So this question of which nation's values are going to determine what speech is allowed for decades to come really puts into perspective our debates about the content issues of the day. Because while we may disagree on exactly where to draw the line on specific issues, we at least can disagree. That's what free expression is. And the fact that we can even have this conversation means that we're at least debating from some common values. If another nation's platforms set the rules, our discourse can be defined by a completely different set of values. So to push back on this, as our policymakers work to define internet policy and regulation, to address public safety and the important social issues, I think that we should also be proactive and write policy that helps the values of voice and expression triumph around the world. The second challenge to expression is from the platforms themselves, including us. Because the reality is that we make a lot of decisions that affect people's ability to speak. Now, I'm committed to the values that we're discussing today, but we won't always get it right. I understand that people are concerned about how much control we have over how people communicate on our services, and I understand people are concerned about bias and making sure that their